Okay, so we're thinking about the last few words of a portion of Chayei Sarah and the outskirts of page 122. And we have a different edition, it's on Genesis chapter 25, verse, 17, 18. We were discussing since verse 12 on page 123, the descendants of Ishmael, and we also talk about their lifestyle. I may have not mentioned it before, but 16, I think we started talking about this last week, the difference between the lifestyle of Ishmael and of Isaac. So I'm reading verse 16 again. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their open cities, by their strongholds. So the commentaries point out open cities, they don't live in one specific, in a walled city. Walled city, again, is discipline. Walled city means they're barriers. They're on the move, they're spreading. They don't like to be tied down. They don't like to commit. And then we talk about the life of Ishmael and the passing of Ishmael, verse 17. These are the years of Ishmael's life, 100 years, 30 years, and 7 years. And he expired and died and was gathered to his people. Okay. Now we have a very interesting verse, also because the last word of the verse is a little bit not clear what it means. And it's talking about the expansion of the descendants of Ishmael and where they lived. Because again, we're trying to highlight that God's promise to Hagar and Abraham that their son Ishmael will flourish has been fulfilled. And we said last week, we showed the verse that said that he'll have 12 descendants. Here we have the fulfillment of that verse. And then we have a beautiful verse 18. They dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is near Egypt, toward Assyria. So apparently that's a wide area. And then it says, over all his brothers he dwelt. Al pnei kol achav nafal. So sounds okay. The problem with this verse is that the last word, nafal, translated by the Art Scroll as dwelt, is not the simple, that's not the most straightforward meaning. Let's see what the Metsudah translates. They also translate dwelt. Well, they're going to translate dwelt because Rashi translates dwelt. But what is nafal? Anyone know Hebrew?
Fell.
No, he fell. So read the verse. The verse reads, over all his brothers he fell. Now, fell sounds like a descent. And we're trying to highlight how Ishmael is prospering. So what is the verse saying when the verse says, over all his brothers he fell? So that's the first thing we want to address. And we're going to have two interpretations in Rashi, and then we're going to see the later commentaries, which first disagree with Rashi, then they can uphold Rashi. But it's not just the meaning of the specific word. It's not just the meaning of the specific word. What it's really trying to do is, what is the Torah trying to leave us? This is really the end of the story of Ishmael, right? This is after this point, we don't really hear about Ishmael anymore. So the Torah is hinting to us, telling us something about the descendants of Ishmael. What is the taste it's leaving us with, right? If you read the simple words, it sounds like nafal, he fell. Is that a positive or a negative? If it's negative, it means we're leaving with a negative taste of Ishmael. If it's positive, then the Torah is telling us that there's something positive about them. So that's why I think it's more than a word. It's also more like what feeling is the Torah trying to create when we almost say goodbye to Ishmael at this point.
He was like the senior brother.
Yes.
The way I understood.
Yes.
He almost ruled her. But the question was, does he do that over?
So we mentioned last week that in their lifetime, earlier in the lifetime, there was a tension between Ishmael and Isaac of who's going to be the heir. And then we said that at this point, Rashi said, based on the verse, that Ishmael does teshuvah, he repents. Where do you see that he repents? Because when it described the passing of Abraham on verse 9, if you have this book, page 123, verse 9, top of the page, it says his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. Right? Page 123, verse 9, the top line, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. And we mentioned last week that Rashi says, this teaches that Ishmael does teshuvah, he repents. How does he repent? He allows Isaac to go first. So it wasn't just a question of who's going to go first in the procession. It was who is going to be considered the more prominent or the bearer of the legacy. And Ishmael acknowledges at this point that even though he is a descendant of Abraham, but Abraham's full legacy is going to be expressed through Isaac. So at that point, seems like it's positive. In fact, so Rashi says something very powerful. Rashi says, if you look at verse 17, these were the years of Ishmael's life, 130 years and 7 years, and he expired and died. I don't know okay, I'm not sure I know exactly what Vayigva means. But Rashi says like this. Let me show you the Rashi. It's an incredible Rashi. Rashi says, I want to just open it so I get the English translation so I don't bunch it up.
So he was gathered to his people.
Yeah, what does it mean, gathered to his
were
people?
not Very, righteous.
Oh,
people.
so Rashi says the opposite. Rashi says that the word, he doesn't necessarily, it's not clear if he's going on those words gathered to his people or the previous words. So we'll get to them in a second because there's a bracket here in the Rashi. It seems like there's two versions, but
It also says God blessed Isaac
yeah,
and didn't say he blessed Ishmael.
right. That was the previous paragraph. And then we have a new paragraph which talks about Yishmael. Now in this paragraph, verse 17, and these are the years of life of Yishmael, 100 years and 30 years and 7 years. And he expired and died and was gathered to his people. Says Rashi, and he expired. Hebrew Vayigva. The term Gviyah is mentioned only regarding the righteous. Baba Basra from the Talmud. The Rashi says, if you look through the Bible, it says Vayamat, he died. Here it says Vayigva, expired, translated as expired. I'm not sure exactly what the etymology of the word Vayigva is. But in any case, that's a term. Rashi says, if you look through the Bible, it's reserved for the righteous. So it seems that according to the sages, this paragraph is here to highlight that Yishmael is in fact righteous. So it's leaving us off with a positive taste. He did teshuvah. We read that last week. He lets Isaac go first. And then when he passes away, the term that is used is a term that is reserved for the righteous. Wonderful.
Expired?
Yeah, Vayigva, he expired. Now the version that I have here in the art scroll says expired, and then in a bracket it says va'asifan, being gathered. So it seems like there's two versions in Rashi, and one version of Rashi says that it's not just expired, it's the combination of expired and gathered to your people.
It also says expired and died.
Correct. So died is something that is written by everybody in the Bible, right? So there's just, if it says you died, it doesn't mean you're righteous, right? Most people die. I mean, everybody eventually.
Everybody does.
Nobody survived life, right? So eventually people die.
Does everybody expire?
No, I mean, the term, Rashi is saying the term Vayigva, the term and he expired, and perhaps also the term gathered to his people. It depends on which version of Rashi you have. That's why I think it's in the bracket here. Right? This Gviyah va'asifa, the word va'asifa being gathered is in a bracket. So there's probably two versions of Rashi. In any case, it's clear that according to Rashi, we're using terminology here about Yishmael, not we, the Torah is using terminology about Yishmael that is reserved for the righteous. What does that tell you? He's a righteous person. Okay. Isn't that surprising then? Then at the end of the next verse, the exact next verse, verse 18, and he dwelt, and they, meaning his descendants, dwelt from Chavila to Shur, which borders Egypt, going toward Ashur. Before all his brothers, he dwelt. Okay, dwelt is before we get to Rashi, the verse says before all his brothers, he fell. So why the term fall? Why the negative term? So let's read Rashi. Rashi again has two interpretations. First interpretation is that don't get bent out of shape. The word falling means dwelt. And he brings biblical references for that. And that's why both the Art Scroll and the Metzuda, everybody translate dwelt. So that's what Rashi says. Nafal, even though typically nafal means to fall, but in this context, in the context of living, falling means dwelt. What's the proof? As in Judges verse 7, now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all those in the east dwelt in the valley. So that's what Rashi says. The word nafal could mean dwelling. Okay, but why do you use the word nafal? Just say dwell. There are other words for dwell. Nafal, to fall, is the more commonly means fall. It could also mean dwell, but why use that term? So here's Rashi's second interpretation. Some will agree with him, some will, Rashi's quoting the Medrash, but you'll see later others disagree. Says the Medrash as follows. Here, says the Medrash, here scripture uses the term nefila, falling, whereas there above, in chapter 16, it states, and before all his brothers he will dwell yishkon. Fascinating. 16:12. Let's see 16:12.
What does it mean he fell?
So we don't know. First thing Rashi says is that falling in the Bible, even though falling means to fall, that's what the word falling means. Usually that's a typical word, but it can also mean to dwell. That's the first thing Rashi says. It can also mean to dwell. So we're translating it, he dwelt. Nevertheless, Rashi has the question, why over here does it use the term falling that over all his brothers he will fall. And you're going to say fall means dwell. Okay, but he uses the term fall. Whereas earlier, when the angel makes the promise to Hagar, if you want to look at the art scroll, it's on page 71 or 73. Very similar language, right? He will be, I'm looking at 71 on the bottom of the page, verse 12, and he shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, everyone's hand against him. We discussed this verse last week. And over all his brothers shall he dwell. Al pnei kol achav, all his brothers he shall dwell. But there it says yishkon, which means dwell. So Rashi says, how come in the promise that the angel promises to Hagar, it says dwell and it means dwell. Here, when it actually happened, it says fall, which means dwell. Why does it use the term fall? Even though fall could mean dwell, why use the term fall?
Okay.
Steve was looking for subtlety, right? You got your subtlety.
I'm looking for something else.
Now I'm saying in general, this morning you said you want subtlety, so I got you subtlety.
In Deuteronomy,
Yeah,
it says, so Moses, servant of Hashem, died there. Doesn't say expired.
correct,
And he was certainly.
correct. So it
certainly
doesn't,
righteous.
you remember you were talking about this, the nightstick rule. In other words, just because it says sit doesn't mean you have to sit. Die is a neutral term. It doesn't mean positive or negative. It could be used for wicked or righteous. If it says die, it doesn't mean you're wicked. Moshe, it says die. What we're saying is expired, that is written exclusively for the righteous. We're not saying every righteous person is as exclusive, because maybe Moshe, you don't have to say that. Maybe it's obvious.
When you
You see what I'm saying? For Yishmael, we have to make the point. So we're going to use a term reserved specifically for Moshe. But it's very interesting. It's actually interesting. Why wouldn't it say it? That's a good point. I don't know.
Does Moses, go ahead, no. Expire, is that a long-term so when you expire, you immediately die. When you die, I think die is for the honorable people.
Right.
I think the opposite way.
Yeah.
Expire is a
Yeah.
cool.
So I don't know enough about the etymology of the words in English or in Hebrew, I confess.
Okay.
But what I do know, what the Rashi is saying is not so much from the word. Rashi is saying from the context. If you comb through the Bible, you will not find a wicked person where it says Gvia, expired. You will not find the term. By Jacob, for example, it says Vayigva. Abraham, what does it say by Abraham? Let's see in a second. Abraham on this page 121, it says Vayigva, and Abraham expired and died at a good old age, right? So the term, if you come through the Bible, again, I don't know anything about what the words mean and what is it the word that makes it connected to righteous? I don't know. Maybe it's written somewhere. I don't know. But the point here is that Rashi is saying, if you want to stay simple, reading Rashi is the first commentary you go to. Before you have any sophistication, you go to Rashi. What does Rashi say? You comb through the Bible, the word Vayigva is expired, is reserved for the righteous, and therefore we know that Yishmael was righteous at this point. Beautiful. Now, the problem is, we're dealing with the next Rashi. Okay, Vicky has a question, and we'll finish up the Rashi. The problem is, if he's so righteous, why does the verse say, over all his brothers he fell? I know you told me falling means dwell, but when the angel said it, he said yishkon, which means dwell, which is the more common word for dwell. Why use a term that could mean falling? But you said, oh yeah, falling also means dwelling. So if he's so positive, if everything is so good, why are we awakening? Why are we using this word, evoking this word of falling? And like I said, it's not just the meaning of the word. We're not just sitting here Sunday morning to figure out the meaning of the word. It's really, this is the last word that Torah uses for Yishmael and his descendants. So what is the Torah telling us here? It's like the goodbye. Is it going to be a positive word or a negative word? So there's a lot at stake. Go ahead, Seth. Yeah.
I know, but
No, go ahead.
when he died,
Yeah.
he died greater than his brothers. He died, he fell, but he
So is
died
fell a positive
greater
word?
than, it's a positive.
If you had a choice to say dwell or fall, which one you think leaves you with a more of a positive taste, feeling? Dwell. And Rashi is saying fall means dwell. Okay, but there's another verse, like I'm showing you, when the angel spoke to Hagar, she said, over all his brothers, yishkon. Apnei kol achav yishkon. Here it says, apnei kol achav nafal. Nafal is falling. So Rashi says, oh, don't worry, don't get too bent out of shape. Because fall could also mean dwell. How do I know? He combed through the 5 books of Moses, he found nothing. He combed through the book of Judges, he found nothing. Joshua, he found nothing. Finally, he found a verse in Judges chapter 7, where the word fall could also mean dwell, right? But it's not the common word. If it would be more common, you would find it in the 5 books of Moses. Go ahead, Neil.
Perhaps fall in battle?
We're not saying that. Then you would say that. Then you would say that we're using fall. Rashi's saying fall is dwell, and he was trying to say how he settles. He settles. They settled by Yishkenu in that same verse. That same verse, Vayishkenu mechavilat shur, the last verse of the parsha. They dwelt. Vayishkenu, mishkan, dwelling place. Vayishkenu, they dwelt from chavilat to shur. We're talking about how they settled. We're talking about this is sort of a description of how they settle. So are they? So why are we using the word nafal? Okay.
Yeah, Rabbi Feldman, thank you. I think before you mentioned that the other place in the Torah where the word fell, that Hebrew word was used in terms of fell was in the context of the crowd. That's kind of problematic, right?
Falling.
No. That Hebrew word, the other place in the Torah that was used in meaning of dwelt was in the context of Midian or
Oh, yeah. I mean in Judges. Yeah, Rashi says the verse that we use, it's actually very interesting. Midianites and Amalekites.
right.
We don't like the Amalekites. We don't like the Midianites either, even though Moshe married a Midianite woman. This week's parsha, this past parsha that we read yesterday, was the battle with Midian. So you're saying that even if what you're saying here is even when Rashi says, "Oh, don't get so bent out of shape," because falling means dwelling, the verse he quotes to support that thesis is a verse that discusses our enemies.
Right.
So we're probably using it in a negative sense. That's a very good point. That's going to be consistent with Rashi. Rashi wants to say that the word nafal is less than what's the word I'm looking for? Less than complimentary. And then I'm going to show you how others disagree. But let's read Rashi. Let's finish with the Rashi. Excellent point. Thank you. Did you want to finish up? Did you want to? I think that's
No, I'm just waiting what he says.
good
next.
observation. So Rashi's right here. It's not on the screen anymore. You see, I want to keep you in suspense. I took it off the screen. But says Rashi like this. It's very interesting, Rashi. Okay. Says Rashi, here scripture uses the term nephilah, falling. Whereas above, it states, what's above? Above is the angel. Chapter 16, verse 12. That's where the angel promises Hagar all the promises that you can have many children, and Yishmael will have to become a great nation, and upon all his brothers he would dwell. Above, it says, and before all his brothers he will dwell, Yishkon. So that's positive. That's what Neil said, right? You said you'd rather have Yishkon than Nafal. Rashi agrees. Says, right, before Abraham died, he dwelt. After Abraham died, he fell. That's what the Genesis Rabbah, that's what the Medrash Rabbah says, and that's what Rashi's quoting.
So dwell is a word you use when you're living. You work over people, and when you die, you fall. But it could mean the same thing. I understand how it could mean the same
Right.
thing in Hebrew.
Right, but let's think about this for a second.
Dwelt is a living word.
Yeah, so we're not talking about the person who died. Abraham passes away, but we're talking about Yishmael and his descendants. So what we're saying is like this. While Avram is alive, Yishmael dwells, which means it's positive because they have the Zayda, they have the grandfather who's looking out for them and influencing them in a positive sense, right? That's the meaning of, that's what Rashi is saying. Rashi is saying, yes, it said, where does it say he fell? And we're going to say falling means dwelling, but it's more of a negative term. She says, once the grandfather passes away, once Abraham, the righteous, passes away, so the positive influence of Abraham weans off Yishmael and his children. And at this point, you're not going to say dwell, which is a positive word, like the Mishkan. We're going to say fall, which means fall doesn't mean they fall. Fall means they dwell, but it's a term that evokes something less than positive. And like Vicky pointed out, even the proof that Rashi offers, it's a term we use when we want to say the Amalekites dwell and the Midianites dwell, we say they fell. We mean they dwell, but we say they fell. So what Rashi seems to be saying is Yishmael is the same camp. So yes, Yishmael, but what doesn't it mean Yishmael that was righteous and he repented? Yes, in Abraham's lifetime. In Abraham's lifetime, there was a positive influence from Abraham to Yishmael's descendants. But after Abraham passes away, the influence wanes, and therefore, at this time, he is falling. He is not dwelling. So it's becoming negative. So the goodbye that we're giving to Yishmael is they started out good. They started out through the influence of Abraham. Then it's weaning and dwelling and diminishing. But thank God there are other people that disagree with Rashi and the Medrash, and they want to say the opposite. And what they're going to do is they're going to say like this. So go ahead.
Okay, we also have a positive view of Rabbi Yishmael because there's a Rabbi Yishmael. in the
Rabbi
Talmud.
Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva's colleague, Rabbi Yishmael.
So it can't be so
Right.
bad. if he's-
Can't be too bad, right?
if you name your
Beautiful
son
name,
Yishmael.
beautiful name. The name Yishmael. I don't know why we don't have enough more Yishmaels. I think you asked me that once. I don't know why. Yishmael's a beautiful name. First of all, it's given by the angel. Second of all, it means Yishmael, God will hear you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful name, but I don't know why there's no Yishmaels. Maybe once we got some, I don't know, there's Muslim persecution, so we don't like the name anymore. I don't know, but
Rabbi, what else I find interesting is that, if we could just roll back one page, so the lineage of the children of Keturah, one is named Midian,
yeah,
which would lead me to believe that that was the beginning of the Midianites.
fascinating. I didn't. You see, I read the verses. I don't pay attention.
And so Zipporah.
Yes, is a
was-
descendant of Ishmael,
was-
descendant of
was
Abraham.
a Descendant of Abraham and Keturah.
And even more beautiful. Okay, this is nice. This is very nice. Why? Because Rashi is proving from the verse in Judges chapter 7 that the word nafal could mean dwell. What are the two nations he quotes? The Amalekite and the Midianites. Midianites are the descendants of Ishmael, and Amalek, maybe I have to check, because basically Amalek is a descendant of Esav, but one of Esav's wives was Machlat, the daughter of Ishmael.
Right.
But one second, Amalek was from a concubine. I have to go check this up. We have to look into that further. But certainly the Midianites, it's clear. So we're using the term here nafal, and we're using in Judges, we're using the term nafal. Very good. You see what happens when you pay attention when you read the verses. You come to all interesting conclusions. Very good. Okay, let's do the Kli Yakar. We want to save the Yishmael and his descendants, right? Because we want to make peace in the world. So we want to have a positive. We want to say that the verse is in fact giving a positive outlook about Yishmael. Now the Kli Yakar is going against the Medrash, so it's a big deal. Going against Rashi and the Medrash, so he needs proof. So here's his proof. You ready? Very good. He's a good guy. Says the Kli Yakar says like this. Says the Kli Yakar. He says 1 second. He says, I don't understand what's happening here. What did you just finish telling me? You told me that throughout Avram's lifetime, there was tension between Yishmael and Isaac of who's going to be the heir. When does Yishmael do teshuvah? The only time we have a record of Yishmael doing teshuvah is at the funeral. So it should have been the opposite. In Avraham's lifetime, Yishmael was fighting with Isaac. So in Avraham's lifetime, this should have been negative. But once Avram passes away, now Yishmael acknowledges that Isaac is the heir at the funeral. So it should be after his passing, it should be the positive term. That's one argument, that just the verses. In other words, what do we say so far? What does Rashi say, quoting the Medrash? Rashi says, look, in Avram's lifetime, Avram had a positive influence on Yishmael and his descendants. After Avram's lifetime, Avram's positive influence wanes, and therefore they quote unquote fall. Fall means they fall spiritually. They're dwelling, but they fall spiritually. That's Rashi's narrative. Says the Kli Yakar, I don't like that narrative. Why not? Because you look at what the Rashi himself said earlier and what the sages say earlier, it seems the opposite is true. In Avram's lifetime, Yishmael is sent away. He keeps fighting with Isaac. As soon as Avram passes away, it seems like Yishmael now does teshuvah. He recognizes his true place, and that brings peace and harmony, and it's wonderful. So it should be the opposite, that after Avram's time, that's when Yishmael, it's almost like Yishmael internalizes Avram's legacy after Avram passes away, which, by the way, happens a lot. A lot of times people don't listen to their parents until the parents pass away, and then they say, oh yeah, maybe my father had good advice, right? So in other words, you don't really take it into you until the father passes away. That's when you have time to listen. It's not just, so what's happening here is, so the Kli Yakar says, it seems to me, if I'm reading the story, that the opposite is true. In Avram's lifetime, he was in a state of falling, and after Avram passes, that's when Yishmael does teshuvah. So what are you telling me? That after Avram passed away, he dwelt. He fell. Says the Kli Yakar, he continues. In general, and in addition, he says, if you look carefully, you see something very interesting about the language. He quotes a verse. It's very poetic, the Kli Yakar. That's why I like him, one of the reasons. He quotes a verse, Habet Yamin Re'eh. It's a quote from King David, the book of Psalms. Look at the right side and look around. Meaning look everywhere. Habet Yamin, look at your right side and see King David's telling God, Look right and see. I don't have any friends. That's the context of the verse. But the Kli Yakar takes it and he says, "Habeit yamin urei." Look at the right side. Look everywhere. In other words, look all over, and you'll see something very interesting. What will you see? The word nafal, fell. What does fell mean? Past tense. Yishkon. That's what the angel said. The angel said he will dwell over all his brothers. Yishkon, the yud makes it future tense. Yishkon, he will dwell. Nafal means past tense. Yishkon means fall means past tense. Will dwell is future tense. So what does that tell us? That means the opposite is true. So obviously what it means is that when it says, the verse says, oh, in the face of all his brothers, he fell. That was before the episode of the funeral. In other words, in Avram's lifetime. But the future is not falling, the future is dwelling. That's how the Kli Yakar wants to read this tension between what the angel said and what the verse says here. So he's agreeing with Rashi. The verse here says nafal, the verse here says negative. But the question is, what is it referring to? Is it referring to after Avram passes away? That's what Rashi says. Kli Yakar says, no, it's referring to before. Before Avram passes away, he fell, because that's why it's past tense. But in the future, after Avram passes away and going forward, it's Yishkon, he will dwell. I guess the Kli Yakar wants to say that the future is bright. In other words, the influence of Abraham is continuing in the descendants of Ishmael, and it's not waning. So I like the Kli Yakar. Now, if you want a little bit more subtlety, I'm sorry this is taking so long. It's just one word and we're sitting here forever, but a little bit more from the Kli Yakar, a little bit more. I think he's feeling guilt that he's arguing with the Medrash. So what he's going to do is he's going to go back, accept the Medrash, accept everything Rashi says, and still say the future is positive. So to summarize, even before we close, Rashi said Nafal is going forward. After Avram dies, that's when he falls. Kli Yakar says no. He fell before. Once Avram died, he dwelt. Once Avram died, he did teshuvah. Now we're going to switch it. We're going to say Nafal is going forward in the future. After Avram died, he fell, but it's still positive. You wanted subtlety this morning.
No, I was thinking of something else if we move off topic.
Yeah.
Just for a moment.
Yeah.
We often cite the Kli Yakar.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, he was a disciple of the Maharal.
Yes.
And we seldom cite the Maharal.
Yes.
So
The Maharal, to read the Maharal. Yeah.
If he taught the Kli Yakar, which I'm
Yes.
sure he did.
Yes.
Why is it that he's so seldom cited?
The Maharal writes not necessarily he doesn't necessarily write a commentary on the Bible itself. The Maharal wrote a commentary called the Gur Aryeh, which is the verses that Jacob blesses Judah. And he says, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, Judah will be Gur is what's the word for a young lion? Lion cub. Judah is a cub and a lion. And Maharal was from the tribe of Judah. So Maharal wrote a book of commentary, not on the Bible, but on Rashi. Now, in addition to that, Maharal was a prolific writer, and he writes a lot of books of philosophy and commentary on the Bible, but not on a specific verse. So he has the whole book on the Exodus, but he's not necessarily describing every verse by verse. So to get into the Maharal and summarize what he's saying is a beautiful thing. It takes a lot of work. With the Kli Yakar, it's much easier because he's giving you nuggets on the verses. He wrote a commentary on the Bible. So in that sense, we should be learning more Maharal. You're right. God willing, that's the New Year's resolution for the new year coming up after Rosh Hashanah, that we're going to do more Maharal. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the Kli Yakar. Says the Kli Yakar, he fell. I think the Kli Yakar doesn't want to argue with the Medrash. He fell means going forward. After Avram dies, he fell. But I want it to be positive. Falling is positive. Why? Falling is a sign of humility. What was Ishmael's number one problem? Arrogance. I'm the heir, I'm ahead of Isaac. The teshuvah means he's humble. And going forward, after Avram passes away, he internalizes Avram's message, he internalizes the humility, and that's why it says fall. Fall is not bad. It's not proud, but that's good. In the context of Ishmael, his number one problem was the arrogance. The fall is the teshuvah. So now he came full circle. We're agreeing with Rashi and the Medrash that says falling is from here on. After Avram died, he fell. He fell. But we're reading it in a positive way. Not that Avram's influence waned after the passing of Avram. And now, as time passes on, Yishmael is drifting farther and farther away from Abraham, which would be a very negative reading of what happens to Avram's descendants. But we're going to now read it. So Kliacher gave us two options. One option is no, falling refers to before. But the second option is falling refers to after Avram passes, but the falling itself is positive because the falling is the humility. And that's the one, that was his biggest problem, is the arrogance. And now he has the humility, and that's how he can internalize Avraham's message. And I think what the Kli Yakar is trying to do is being positive. In other words, a positive outlook for the descendants of Ishmael. And of course, the descendants of Ishmael have done a tremendous amount to teach the world about the unity of God. And I know there's some bumps in the road, and sometimes the descendants of Ishmael get a little radical and cause some trouble. But in the overarching, if you get the bird's eye view of history, they were much more closer to the ideas of the unity of God than our cousins, the other cousins, the descendants of Esav in Europe, meaning Christianity. So in that sense, we want positivity for everybody, and we want world peace. So Nafal, we're going to say, is either Nafal is past and now they're dwelling, or we're going to say Nafal is they're humble. And it's not that we want them to be humble. What we're saying here is that everybody has to recognize their place. And the only way they could fulfill their purpose of creation is if they realize their place. And their place is that they are descendants of Abraham, but they are not the ones who are ultimately going to be the chosen nation here to bring God's presence into the world. That's reserved for the children of Isaac. Why? Because Isaac brings the discipline to the table, as we discussed last week. But you have to know your place to be able to contribute what you can to the purpose of creation. So if I'm in an orchestra and I have the trumpet and I want to play all the time, always, because I love my trumpet, then I'm going to ruin the orchestra. But if I realize my place and says, sometimes the conductor tells me to play, and I'm contributing to the orchestra, that is the symphony, that is how I fulfill my purpose. So not pushing my way to the head actually is the way that I flourish and I make my contribution. That's the pitch. Sorry, we spent, not sorry, it's very nice that we spent 33 minutes on one word of the Torah. If you want a quicker pace, I'm sure there's a Zoom elsewhere. No, I'm kidding. But that's our pace. So that was the Nafal, that was the Nefel. Go ahead, Neil.
When the Torah says that Moses was the most humblest of man, what is the word there?
Anav, that's a different word. Anav is
Anav.
Proper humility is anav. In other words, the nafal is nafal. To say nafal is falling is humility. Probably less common word. The one thing I would say about nafal is we had it earlier. We had it earlier when we discussed Rebecca when she met Isaac. What did it say? Vatipol me'al hagamal. She fell off the camel. And what did we say? Rashi said it doesn't mean she fell. It means she sort of lowered herself toward the ground. So it was like a sign of honor. So you see that the word nafal could mean acknowledging somebody greater than self. So that's what Yishmael is doing, is acknowledging Yitzchak's presence, Isaac's role. I think anava is a much higher level of humility, because I could acknowledge you without really understanding you. Right? In Hebrew, especially in Hebrew, the word acknowledge means I disagree. I don't understand what you're saying, but I acknowledge that you're probably right. You have a debate between the sages. So sometimes one sage convinces another sage, and then I join your camp. That's one way. But now I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree with you. Sometimes I disagree with you, but I acknowledge that in this case, you're right. So the etymology of hoda'ah, to acknowledge in biblical Hebrew, in Mishnaic Hebrew, so the hodot means I acknowledge that you're right, but I don't really understand it, right? If I'm here having a debate with someone much smarter than me, the greatest professor, the greatest scientist, I don't understand what he's saying, but I can acknowledge he's right. That's more like the Ishmael-Isaac relationship. So I acknowledge, but do I truly understand what Isaac is? Not necessarily. Anav is humility, but it's a much deeper humility. I'm humble because I understand who you are. I understand God. I understand the value of another person, so I'm humble. So I think anava is the greater word. But nafal is to acknowledge. I lower myself. I acknowledge.
So is Ishmael angry with Abraham that he was sent out as a baby, kind of thrown out of the camp?
It could be. If you had to make a play about Ishmael's life, maybe that's part of his the issues he has to work out in therapy. But it seems that he works it out. It seems like when we have to understand, because we're not telling you the whole story of Ishmael, every verse we say is significant. And if we say at the funeral, he puts Isaac first, it means he makes peace with that. right? Now, was there a process for him to come to that recognition? Most probably. Is that process relevant for us? Not necessarily. So that's why it's not our story, it's his story. But the bottom line is that he gets to the place, he makes peace with that. How many hours of therapy he had to pay? I don't know.
Isn't somebody does Shuva almost higher than?
In a sense, yes.
And we
Yes.
consider it, so doing that act.
Yes.
You can understand.
Maybe that's why we consider him righteous. We say we use the term expire, which we said is reserved for the righteous, for him being first, and then having to go through the fact that he was sent away, and the fact that he can come home, make peace with his father.
Were his brothers, well, Isaac was righteous, with his other brother.
What it meant.
He dwelt over it.
Let me just say what it means for Ishmael to be righteous and Isaac to be righteous is a completely different story, because the expectation is different.
It doesn't matter, were they both righteous?
They were both righteous, but what does righteous mean?
Were the other brothers righteous?
No, it doesn't say that. They were sent away to the east. That doesn't say they were
So
righteous.
They
They weren't
weren't.
negative. They weren't wicked. They weren't causing any trouble. The problem with Ishmael is that initially he was causing trouble in the sense that
But
he repented,
which is a high form.
which is a high form of connection
And
to
then
God.
he
It takes a
became
lot more
humble,
effort.
like you said.
And that's why it says that he was righteous. But I'm just pointing out that when you say Ishmael is righteous, what does it mean Ishmael is righteous? It means that he's living his life. He's in the expanses. He's riding his horses. He's a horseback rider. He's a cowboy, whatever they do in the desert. He's running the sheep. He's a Bedouin. And that's the life that he is supposed to live. He's not required to do 613 commandments. He's not required to be the sacrifice for God on the like Isaac was, right? But yes, for him, that's his role. His role is to preach the oneness of God and spread it to his part of the world. And that's what he does perfectly. And like you say, Neil alludes to it, and you clarified that it must have been difficult for him to come to that recognition, to make that peace with the Father when he is first, and when he was the oldest child, and then quote unquote rejected, not because of his father, because of his father's wife, because of Sarah. But at the end of the day, his father sent him away, and to come back and to acknowledge the second son from the other mother, that must have taken a lot of internal work and a lot of humility, and that's why he's righteous. But I'm just saying, what does it mean he's righteous? Does it mean he's putting on tefillin and praying all day? No, it means he's going hunting. But that's what's required of him.
It's righteous
In his
realm.
context, correct. And that's what we want to say. We want to say, just because you're not Isaac, it doesn't mean you're not righteous, because not every person has to become a Jew, right? Other people, other nations, their role is not to become a Jew. They don't have to become a Jew to go to heaven or to fulfill their purpose of creation. That's the difference between Judaism and other nations and other religions, in the sense that we don't think there's only one path to connect to Hashem. But to be a Jew, you need much more than just belief in God. You need the discipline. You have to be committed. You have to be able to be committed and to do Hashem's will in a much deeper way. And that is Isaac, and that's Sarah, and that takes strength and takes discipline. And that's something that Ishmael didn't have, but that's fine. But that's also why Ishmael is not considered the heir of Abraham. But in some sense, he is. In some sense, he's carrying Abraham's legacy.
Did he try to become more?
No, he wasn't required of him. It wasn't required of him. That was his job. All his job was be like Abraham, invite guests, which, by the way, they're very hospitable. Abraham, Ishmael's descendants, believe in the one God, be hospitable, do no evil, and don't consider yourself. But the big sin is don't consider yourself superior to Isaac. Don't consider yourself the ultimate heir of Abraham. And he had trouble with that in his lifetime. But at the end, in Abraham's lifetime, but at the end of Abraham's lifetime, he came to peace with that. And that's fine. You come to peace with, right? A lot of times when people are younger, they have a certain perspective of what they are and what they should be. And then at a certain point, people they make peace with who they are and they make peace with their role. I was listening to NPR once. I don't know if it's good or bad, but they were saying the saddest point of a person's life is whatever. They have it down to the day. Like when you're 47, it's like the saddest point in your life, because that's when you get to the point and you realize that everything you thought you're going to become, you're not going to become. And then after that, this is what they said. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. After that, you make peace. And then people are so happy. They're so happy because they could celebrate what they achieved in their life.
Not
everybody. Agree. But what I'm trying to say is at least enough people that have certain expectations of what they want to be and what they should be. And at a certain point, you could make peace that I'm not going to be that. That's okay. I'm not saying everyone's like that. Maybe you keep the ambition till you're 100, no problem. Maybe you should do that. I think we'll talk about that with Jacob. Jacob is never making peace. So that's a good point. But I'm just saying there is a concept where I want to be the firstborn. I want to be my father's heir. I want to be this. I want to be that. And then at a certain point, I could say, you know what, I won't be it. And you know what, I'm still going to be happy. And you know what, I still have my role. And you know what, I still have meaning in my life just because I'm not Isaac. And that's a wonderful place. You don't have to be the other person, right? You don't have to be the thing that you thought you wanted to be when you were 16. Maybe your path is different. And at a certain point, either with therapy, without therapy, he works it out and he makes peace with that. Yes.
Is it valid, do you think, to think of Ishmael in the context of the kidnapped child? In that he was sent away from his father's house and he didn't have fairly early age.
Right.
And he didn't have the equal opportunity to learn as his brother did.
Right. I would say not that I would even give him a bigger defense. To kidnap child would mean that something is required of you, and by no fault of your own, you were deprived from understanding that and appreciating that, and that's why you don't do that. With Ishmael, it wasn't required of him. His role was not to be Abraham's heir, not to introduce Judaism into the world. It was not his role. His role was to take the teachings of Abraham and highlight the universal message of the teachings of Abraham, which is the one God. And that's the universal teaching, one God, and therefore basic morality. That's his role. His role is to be Abraham's voice to the nations, because remember, Abraham has two roles. Abraham is a patriarch of the Jewish people, but Abraham also has a role of being the father of many nations, as God tells him. Sarah and Isaac, Sarah was not told to be the father of many, to be the matriarch of many people. She's the matriarch of the Jewish people. And in that sense, the tension between Abraham and Sarah is really the tension between Abraham's universal message and the aspect of Abraham, which is the patriarch of the Jewish people. So what I'm saying is Ishmael was never intended not by his nature, not by his mother, he didn't have the spiritual DNA to be able to do what Isaac is doing. And I think that at some point you make peace with that, which is fine, which is okay. Nothing wrong with that. I think he made peace with that. Did it take an effort? Yes. Was it difficult for him? Yes. Is he considered righteous because he did teshuvah and he recognized that? Yes. But I don't think it's a missed opportunity. I don't think it's not a sad story. Oh, he wasn't able to become Isaac. He wasn't supposed to become Isaac. He didn't have that spiritual makeup, and that wasn't required of him. It wasn't his message. It wasn't his mission.
I'm sorry, sir. I agree and understand, but don't you think he would have experienced more spiritual growth
Yes.
had he not been turned out of the house?
Yes, but the only critique that we have against him, not the only, different opinions, but let's say the majority opinions of the sages, the critique that we have against him is that he considered himself the heir. That is the critique. In other words, he said, my lifestyle is the totality of the Abrahamic message. And that is incorrect. Not that his message, not that his lifestyle doesn't express Abraham, it does, but there's also more to Abraham. The fact that Abraham will father the Jewish people. So that is the sin. If that's the sin, it means other things that he did, that's fine. We don't have no expectation for him to do more. Everybody has their role, and not everybody, like I said, and I'm a kid that want to become the greatest scholar in the world. I want to become the greatest inventor in the world. I want to become the greatest scientist in the world. And I get to a certain point, and you say, this is my role. It's not what I thought it's going to be. And either I can be upset and try to grow, which is good. You need some ambition. But at some point, you become, if you could make peace and say, my role is significant. Just because it's not the role that I pictured, as long as you realize your role is significant, you make peace. I read from Rabbi Steinsaltz this morning. I don't know the context because I was reading and it was online and it was on my phone, and they only had, every page they put two sentences that are large, so I could read that on my phone. So that's what popped out. And he said like this. He says, I don't want everybody. He says, I'm gonna batch it up, but I don't want something like, I don't want everybody to be equal or something like that, but I want everyone to be significant, right? So in other words, if I feel that I'm significant, it may be different than the way you're significant, but if I feel I'm significant for myself, before God finds me unique, I'm unique, I'm significant. Significant means I'm unique, I'm different than you. Now, do we have to be the same? No, but it would be a tragedy if I don't feel significant. That's the tragedy.
So he didn't feel significant.
In the beginning of his life, no, because in the beginning of life, he was comparing himself. It was a race. Who can be the heir of Abraham? Who can be the father of the Jewish people? But that was a race he was doomed to fail because that wasn't his mission. That wasn't his DNA. It wasn't what he was supposed to do. So he was fighting the wrong battle. He was racing in the wrong race. At some point, he makes peace and says, no, I'm significant. I'm not the same as my brother, so I'm not first, so I'll be second at the funeral. It doesn't matter, but I'm significant. And that is what makes people have peace and be able to embrace their mission, because I'm significant. Maybe the other person achieves more than me, that's okay, but I'm significant. That's what people really want. Now, sometimes it takes a few decades to realize that. Sometimes you never realize that. But I think that's what's happening to Yishmael.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Yeah, I had that question for a while, and I liked all the explanations, and I liked the positive aspects of being humble in the meaning of the word dwelt. The only problem I have, because it says in the translation that you humble over all his brothers in verse 18, and also it's
on the face of all his brothers, but in Hebrew,
over.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and also the first in verse 18 starts in the plural. They dwelt in, meaning that's descendants, and it ends in a singular. So he kind of achieved that during the lifetime, the teshuvah, and feeling humble. But why does it say over?
Okay, so I think, I'm not sure, but I think at the beginning of, I'll start with your second question, because I like it better, not because it's a better question, because I think I know the answer. So that's right. That's the other one I'll buy for time. Hopefully, if I talk enough, maybe I'll figure something out. No, I'm kidding. It starts with the plural, moves to the singular, because verse 18 is talking about the descendants of Yishmael. So it says they.
Clearly, yeah.
They dwelt from the Havilah to Shur, which is near Egypt, over all his brothers. What's his brothers? Now we talk about the entire family as a totality. At the end, we're talking about Yishmael, right? So we talk about his descendants, but then it's the conclusion. Remember, we're finishing the story of Yishmael. There's no more other mention of Yishmael in the Torah, except one other place where it talks about not Yishmael himself, but Esau marries Yishmael's sister, right? Yishmael's daughter, Machatat Yishmael. Esau marries Yishmael's daughter. So, but there's no other mention of Yishmael. This is the end of Yishmael. So what does it say? So it talks about he's got 12 families, as the angel promised. And then it says where they dwelt. And then it says, now it's a summary. And when you get to the summary, the last 4 words are the summary. And the summary, when you say he, you're meaning Yishmael. What's Yishmael? His whole family. Now we're talking about Yishmael as an individual, but not as an individual, as the patriarch. And now we're referring to the whole Yishmael as one unit. So that's the second point. The first point, I don't think is such a big question, because al pnei kol achav, the face of all his brothers, the face doesn't mean, they translate over all his brothers, but that's not what it says. Al pnei kol achav, literally on the face of all his brothers. And we discussed this last week, that on in Hebrew is next to. Like we say on top of the well, al pnei means in the face of his brothers, and the face of his brothers means in their presence. I don't think it's an expression of arrogance.
Right, because if they translated dwelt, not being humble, so over, they translated over instead of.
They're doing over. Oh, you're saying over all his brothers as well. Over.
Yeah. So they translated it as a unit in the meaning, because they translate the meaning.
Right. I don't know why they say over. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Okay, that's why you always have to have at least 3 translations in front of you. Look at the one Am Chabad Org Mitzuda, and they translate. And they dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which borders the Egypt, going toward Ashur. Before all his brothers, he dwelt.
Right. It's a unit.
Right. Al Panei, on the face of, and the face of means in the presence of. You could do over, under, and middle, do whatever you want. But Al Panei means in the face of, I think. It doesn't translate into English. That's why they have to. You got to do something else. So I think we finished a portion, right? Mazel tov. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Now we get to the drama. Drum roll. Now we get to Jacob and Esau. I see Seth is warming up. Very good.
So it's interesting. There are some people who still refer to Muslims as Ishmaelites.
Right. Yeah, I think.
I see that often in writing.
Yeah. Maimonides refers to the Muslims as Ishmaeli. He says, Muhammad, he says Ishmaeli, the Ishmaelites. That's how.
But the Y was dropped.
The what? Oh, that's probably.
Which is interesting.
That's probably.
Ishmael is opposed to Yishmael.
Yeah, but that's probably just Greek or Latin. I don't know which one.
Right.
Just like in Hebrew, all the names, the vet becomes bet. You have Rebecca instead of Rivka. You have Abraham instead of Avraham. So, because I think whichever language it was, Greek or Latin, I think Greek didn't have a B. Is that a V? Is that right? Am I onto something? Where do you get from Avraham to Abraham? So you have Rebecca. You're getting the B's. I think it could be I'm wrong, but I think that I don't know enough Greek, or I don't know any Greek, but maybe it was from the Latin. I think it's from the Greek. I don't know, but it could be that it's connected there. So then Yishmael would be. I wonder how the Arabs say Yishmael. I don't know. Do you have any? Maybe Bob could help us. Ishmael. Ishmael. Okay, fine.
So here we have the same drama.
Yes.
One brother. And
It gets
another brother,
it gets
one
worse.
brother.
It gets worse. You know why it gets worse? Because before it was two brothers from two separate mothers. So the tension, the closer the person, if I fight with a stranger, it's not as painful if I fight with my own brother. Because the closer the person is to you, the expectation is that there'll be peace and harmony. And then when somebody next to you has tension with you, it's much harder. So the tension up till now was sons of two different mothers. Now it's much worse because the tension becomes between Esav and Jacob, and they're not only the same mother, but they're twins. They were in the womb together. So when you have a twin, I suppose, I don't have a twin, but I suppose if you have a twin, you would expect, you look out for me.
So what are we supposed to learn like from? all of
That's a
this
good question.
drama?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, if you don't know, Rabbi.
I don't know. I'm just putting it out here. Then, everybody here draws their conclusions. But I don't have, what's the word I'm looking
You're the
for?
rabbi.
No, the rabbi is just the preacher, the one who conveys I'm the translator. I'm just putting it out
So
here.
does it
I'm the
end there
curator,
with these
but-
two guys?
No.
This drama?
Then you
Two
have,
brothers?
then you have Joseph and his brothers. It gets worse. It always gets
Oh,
worse.
right.
It gets worse before it gets better. It only heals with maybe Menashe and Ephraim, Moshe and Aaron. Older brother being happy for the younger brother's leadership role. That's where you get real healing. With Aaron. He'll be happy. Moshe says, I don't want the job. Why? To be the leader. Because it says, go to Aaron, go. It says, shlach. It doesn't say these words. It says, shlach navi atishlach. Go send with the person you should send. Commentaries say, go send with Aaron. And God says, we only know that because the answer, we know the answer. God says, don't worry, you have Aaron, your brother, the Levite. He will see you and he will be happy in his heart. Unheard of. He'll be happy in his heart that the younger brother is becoming the leader and he is not. And not only he won't have a grudge, but he'll be happy. But it takes to the second book of the Torah to get to that point. Till now, there's just the tension just keeps getting worse.
So maybe they haven't learned from.
Yes.
other guys.
But I think that what we said earlier is a very important point. A very, very important point is that at some point I have to realize that I'm significant. I have to realize that I have a role. And in creation, and creation will never be complete without my role. Does it mean that I have to be where I think I should be? I have to be number one. And if I'm number 29, then I'm less significant? No, everybody has a role. And that is an important point. It may take a full book in the Torah for us to learn that message. And maybe that's the message, to realize that I am indispensable and I am critical to the divine plan. That's it, wherever I am. That's what I need to know. And if I know that, then I'll be able to fulfill my mission with the proper enthusiasm and the proper commitment. Okay, now the fun begins. Page 125. We're going to the next parsha. There's a lot of repetition here, and the sages have a lot to say about the repetition. But before we even get to what the sages say, we're going to focus on the simple meaning and why the repetition. But I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's look at the new parsha. I have no idea who divided. Well, I know it wasn't a Jewish source. The division of the chapters doesn't recognize this. The division of the new parsha starts at chapter 9 at verse 19, because obviously the person who divided the priest who divided the chapters thought that this is a continuation, but the rabbis say no, it's not a continuation. We have the new parsha. In fact, in the Torah, it's a new paragraph. And we begin with the descendants of the story of Isaac. Okay, and these are the generations. Very funny translation. How do they translate? They translate these are the offsprings. Toldot is a very interesting word. Toldot means offsprings, the children, descendants. But Toldot can also mean the occurrences. These are the stories. So it could be both. It's that we're going to tell you the descendants of Isaac. We're also going to tell you the descendants, but also the stories of the descendants. So both could be right. These are the generations, meaning the offsprings of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Now, this is a strange verse. First of all, why do you have to tell me Isaac is the son of Abraham? We already know that. We've been reading about that for a while. That's the first clause of the verse, the problem with the first clause. First clause is, these are the generations of Isaac, son of Abraham. We know Isaac is the son of Abraham. And then the second clause of the verse is even more surprising, unnecessary, redundant. Abraham begot Isaac. You just finished telling me that Isaac is the son of Abraham. So why do you have to say that Abraham gave birth to Isaac? That is why the repetition. Steve, go ahead.
I think it's placing an emphasis for a particular reason,
Yes.
because that he was the son of Abraham, and you shouldn't forget that.
Right.
And you should remember that all of the Abrahamic qualities are prevalent
In Isaac.
in Isaac.
Oh, so I'm going to just continue with what you're saying before we even get to the Rashi and the Medrash and the Hasidic philosophy. Everybody had what to say on this, but I'm going to stay with yours, at least for the beginning. We just finished talking about Yishmael. Yishmael's descendants. Yishmael is Yishmael and his descendants, the family of Yishmael, which are the sons of Abraham. But now we want to say, like Steve says, we want to emphasize and say, 1 second, we want to emphasize and say, make no mistake, the true descendant of Abraham is Isaac. In other words, the ultimate descendant is Isaac, and that's what we highlight. Isaac, son of Abraham. I know you've been thinking about Yishmael, but we're shifting away from Yishmael to Isaac. That's the simple meaning. Not the simple. That's before we get to the Medrash. Also, it's the way of starting the story anew. The way the style of the Torah, it's going to do with Esav's children also in a few portions. It gave you that branch of the family. Now it wants to pull you back to Isaac. So now we're sort of restating what we know to say this is a new beginning. And that's why he said Abraham, the son of Isaac. But again, why Abraham begot Isaac? The second clause of the verse saying it twice. So you're saying it's for emphasis, I agree. But there's many other interpretations. We're just going to do one today. The rest we'll do not next week. Next week is the 9th of Av. We're not going to study Torah, but it's the following week. We're going to do it. So we'll take 1 week break on Sundays, 1 Sunday off. We're going to be busy morning, no time for study. The Torah says the law says you're not allowed to study Torah on the 9th of Av. Why not? Because you have to mourn. And the problem with studying Torah with you mourn is of what? Torah makes a person joyous. That's what King David says. We say that Shabbos davening, Pikudei Hashem Yisharim Sam Chalev. The laws, the precepts of God are upright. They bring joy to the heart. So whatever you're going to do today, and nothing will make you as happy as when you study Torah. So that's why 9th of Av, you can't study Torah, except the sad parts, but that's for another story. That's for another time. I just want to show you one verse, and we'll conclude with that. Asher Yalda Hagar HaMitzrit. Okay. Let's look back to chapter. I have 1 minute left, at least 1 minute before overtime. Overtime, you start billing overtime. I'll give you longer, you bill me longer, but I still have 1 more minute before overtime. Verse 12. So where is it? What page is it? No, chapter 20. Yeah, chapter 25, verse 12. Right? Yeah. Look how we describe Yishmael and contrast that to the way we're going to describe. So it's the page before, page 122, page 123, verse 12. So you want 2 fingers. You want 1 finger on verse 12. These are the descendants of Ishmael. And then you're going to put 1 finger on verse 19 on the next page. So how do we describe the descendants of Ishmael? So the verse says like this. These are the descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian Sarah's maidservant, bore to Abraham. Okay? So it says Abraham's son, but Hagar, Yalda, Hagar bore to Abraham. But he's still Abraham's son, but Hagar bore to Abraham. That's what it says here. Now turn the page to page 125. In other words, now we're going to verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Yitzchak. Not Sarah, but Abraham. What's happening here? There's a little change. So the commentaries explain as follows. Son means you're the son of. That's biological. Both Abraham and Isaac are the biological children of Abraham. The question is, the word begot, holid, the word holid, give birth to. Some of the commentaries say this, that represents whose qualities have been passed on to Yishmael, to the child. So what does it say about Yishmael? It's primarily Hagar's qualities. Hagar bore Yishmael to Abraham. It doesn't use the term yulad, that Abraham yalad et Yishmael, Abraham begot Yishmael. It doesn't say that, just as he's his son. So in other words, son means biological. Give birth to, meaning your qualities are being passed on to your child. And so now you'll see it's not reiterated. It's two different things. Verse 19, these are the generations of Isaac, son of Abraham. Son of Abraham just means you're the biological son. Doesn't mean the qualities have passed on. No, doesn't mean that. Because it could be you're the son of your mother. In other words, it could be that primarily it's your mother's qualities within you, as we read in verse 12 about Yishmael. Here, the verse says, Abraham begot Isaac, which means Abraham gave birth to Isaac, which means Abraham's qualities have been given over to Isaac. So that's why the second half of verse 2 is not, verse 19 is not redundant. It's saying a completely different thing. Ben Abraham, son of Abraham, means one thing. Abraham begot Isaac means something completely different. And how do I know? Compare that just a few verses earlier, where it says, these are the descendants of Ishmael, son of Abraham. It doesn't say Abraham begot Ishmael. It says Hagar, the Mitzrite, the Egyptian. What is it telling you? There's Egyptian qualities here. In other words, he doesn't have he doesn't have Abraham's full nature. And we'll keep talking about it because next week, but the next time we meet in 2 weeks, we'll talk about seemingly Ishmael is much closer in character to Abraham. So why does the Torah imply here that actually Isaac is? So we'll continue on that theme. Go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if you want to postpone because we're going over time, but from the Torah perspective, how do you decide whose quality the child inherits? Is it a biological or this is the influence?
Well, you have to see. I don't know the answer, but you see it. The proof is in the pudding, right? Ultimately, you see it in the behavior, right? Like when I have a new baby and they say, "Who does it look like? Which grandma does it look like?" I always say, ask the grandmas, but I also say, come back to me when the kid's 5 years old, right? I don't know. You ask me, all babies look alike if you ask me. Don't tell my wife I said that. But ultimately, who is this kid more like, his father or mother? Don't ask me now. Ask me when he's 90, right? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll see. We'll find out if he's like his father or his mother. You know the joke. The joke is, this is a funny joke. I knew there's a funny joke and I couldn't remember it, but now I just remember it, so I laughed. The joke is that the two people come, a couple come. Oh my God, I'm going to botch it up because this could be said much more funny than I can ever say it. But I'm going to try to say it as best as I can. So the couple comes to the rabbi and they say, we have a big dispute. We can't get along. Please help us solve the problem. They say, what's the problem? So they say, look, we're having a child. We're having a child and we're fighting over what to name the child. So the father says, so the rabbi turns to the wife and says, what do you want to name your child? She says, me, I want to name my child Joseph. She says, why do you want to name your child Joseph? Because my grandfather was a righteous man. And he was such a righteous man. I want my child to be like him. So I want to name my child Joseph, who was so righteous. My grandfather was so righteous. Fine. You heard the thing where the wife turns to the husband. What do you want to name your child? He says, me, I want to name my child Joseph. Joseph? What's the fight? No, I want to name my child Joseph because of my grandfather. Not my wife's grandfather, my grandfather. So the wife says, your grandfather was a crook. I don't want my kid to have the name of your grandfather. And they're fighting back and forth. The rabbi says, you know what? I have the idea. The baby is going to be born. You're going to name your child Joseph. Later, we'll find out which grandfather he's named after. If he's the crook or if he's righteous, we'll find out later. So I think that which child, who gets, and you get the nature of which grandfather, we'll find out later. You don't have to worry about that at the moment of birth. You'll find out later. But yeah, I guess the proof is in the pudding, I guess.
So the influence, he influenced both, but apparently one was the nature kind of was prevalent.
Yeah, what I said now is a little bit different than what I said before, because before I was saying Ishmael is the perfect Ishmael embodied his father, and now I'm saying a little bit different. We're talking about Isaac. We're saying ultimately the true influence of Abraham is in Isaac. And where do you see that? So I'm having it both ways. In some sense, Ishmael did carry out his father's legacy in some sense, but not ultimate. In other words, not the complete legacy. And that's why you want to say, who was Abraham's child? you look at Ishmael, you say, yeah, he has influence from his father, but he's the son of Hagar the Mitzrite, which is fine. That's why he's running around in Arabia, not willing to commit to civilization, because he needs that free spiritedness, which is wonderful, and that's why he's also hospitable like his father. It's wonderful, but he doesn't have the full influence of Abraham. He is begot. Hagar, the Egyptian, begot him to Abraham, meaning she is dominant in his personality. Whereas when you look at when you look at Yitzchak, the Torah says not only he's the son of Abraham, that just means biological. But we also say Abraham begot Isaac, meaning Abraham passed on his nature to his son, which we have to define what that means, because on the surface it doesn't seem that way. But that will be for 2 weeks from now in good health, hopefully in Jerusalem, the rebuilt Jerusalem, with the coming of Mashiach immediately. Yashikah, thank you.
Maybe we won't have Tisha B'Av.
Maybe you won't have to. Then we'll meet next Sunday. So if the temple is rebuilt, we'll meet next Sunday in Jerusalem. We'll have Jerusalem bagels. There's still a Banker's bagels there in the old city. Maybe in Tel